Hi, this is Caroline Vergibbenade from The Happy Sensitive, and I'm here with a video about chronic fatigue syndrome or adrenal fatigue. And adrenal fatigue is a very, very big topic. It's not something I can fully address in a video, obviously. But I do want to bring up one kind of overarching perspective on it that I think will be helpful to help you figure out what may be going on and what you can do, for yourself. So one of the things that tends to happen with chronic fatigue, and most people that I know of that I've talked to who are struggling with chronic fatigue, including myself, have experienced this, that you, especially on, let's say, the in the beginning stages, there tend to be really these extremes where you have moments where you're like super energized and you like have lots of energy, like almost like too much energy, but then there's like huge stretches of time where you have very little energy. And for some people it shows up as, you might have bursts of anger or some kind of specific emotional kind of energy, or it just may feel like it's really hard to regulate your activities because one moment you have a lot of energy and then you have very little, right? And that's really hard to deal with because, of course, the way we usually are taught to live our life is very much kind of on a constant level of energy expenditure where you pretty much have the same energy every day. So if it varies and it fluctuates a lot, especially if it suddenly hits you, like chronic fatigue happens and then suddenly all your energy is all over the place, it's really confusing. And it's really confusing to know, like, okay, should I rest or should I do something? What if I'm resting too much and I lose my rhythm? What if I'm doing too much and I exhaust myself? So it's really complicated. But I want to look into what may be going on there. And one of the things, of course, if with any illness, when you get ill, the big question is like, what did I do wrong, right? There's a sense of I did something wrong. What I want to suggest here is that it may not be that you did anything wrong. It may just be the kind of shifting inner energy patterns that because of a kind of shift that's happening, suddenly it becomes a problem where before it was manageable. So one of the things I noticed in my life is that prior to getting chronic fatigue, I actually started to take some very empowering decisions pro myself and pro my own life. So even though I had long-standing patterns around overgiving and doing too much that I had to resolve, there were some things that were starting to shift. I had bought my own house, so I had my own space for the first time in my life. I was saying no to certain big things at work that I felt were just not right for me. I was really standing up for myself in significant ways. And strangely enough, that in combination with some insights I started to have about certain old patterns that I had, suddenly catapulted me to this place where I was exhausted and I could hardly do anything. But then there would be these moments where I had these bursts of like incredible energy, and it was just really strange to witness and to go from having an active life to suddenly having a very passive life and being ill, and having to deal with everything that meant. So one of the first clues I got from a Tai Chi teacher was he said something along the lines of, you're very tired. We all have this kind of fatigue inside of us that comes from kind of holding down underwater some of the emotions that we are truly feeling but that we've learned are unacceptable. And I think this is a very big key of chronic fatigue, and it goes even further. I think in a way we have all learned that certain aspects of who we are not okay and they're not safe, and it's not safe to be ourselves fully. So we have learned to kind of cut off and suppress certain aspects of ourselves. And it's kind of like energy-wise, it's like we're holding those parts of us underwater. It's like, we're using all this pressure to keep this part of us underwater. It's like holding a ball underwater. If you ever tried taking a ball, big ball, holding it underwater, it takes a lot of effort, and it really makes your arms tired to hold it down. And that's the kind of energy that you're expending, kind of suppressing parts of yourself. Except it's not something you're doing consciously. It's something that you're kind of doing, subconsciously. It's something that at some point you decided to do because it felt like, okay, it was necessary. And then it just became this pattern that just became chronic because your subconscious just kind of, redirected it as almost like a kind of reflex. Like, okay, we're going to do it like this from now on, and you don't have to think about it anymore. You don't even have to be aware of it. Your body just kind of integrates that pattern into your whole being. And so you don't even realize that you're doing this, but a part of you is holding down another part of you, right? Now, I think as long as you're kind of, going with the flow and doing what everybody else is maybe expecting of you, or you're just kind of staying in a certain pattern, this might not become a problem for you. I think that it becomes a problem the moment that more of your authentic self starts to come up and you start to invite more of who you really are to come through in your life. You start to take decisions that honor who you really are. Because what happens then is you start to access a really big power inside of yourself. When you're truly aligned, you're truly connected to who you are, you're letting that come out, that's an incredibly powerful energy. So the moment you start to invite that more into your life, you start to take decisions that are aligned with who you really are, you're bringing that energy up to the surface. But at the same time, a part of you is also holding that energy down because, those patterns are still in place. So suddenly this conflict, which has always been there, this inner tension of not fully being able to express yourself, of having to hold yourself back, that's always been there, suddenly it gets intensified and it becomes this huge energy war inside of yourself. And I'm not saying that this is what's going on for everyone with chronic fatigue, but it is something that I've noticed, and it is something that may be going on. And the interesting thing is, if that is what is going on for you, then there's something you can start to do about it, because you can start to take responsibility for all the ways in which you may be holding yourself back. And it's really encouraging to know that the more you kind of dissolve those old patterns and the more you start to allow yourself to be who you are and clean up any kind of old emotional baggage or old thinking patterns that are suppressing part of who you are, the more you start to clean that up, the more your kind of natural energy starts to come through again, and then you find that suddenly you have these new levels of energy. You can suddenly do more than you were able to do before. You've reached a new plateau. And then when you reach a new plateau, there will be other kind of limiting factors that you have to uncover and resolve before you reach a new plateau. But that's kind of how you can get your energy back. And the interesting thing that I really want to stress here is that I've really found there to be this connection between letting more of your true energy come through and wanting that to happen. It's like you want to access your authentic self, you want to access who you really are and let your real you come through and be yourself in every possible way. So you start that process, you start to initiate that process, and then all the blocks rise to the surface in a much bigger and more powerful and more overwhelming way. So it looks like, you're going backwards and it looks like things are getting worse. But actually what's happening is that the blocks that were already there are coming to the surface in a really huge way where you have to address them. And in a certain way, the fact that they're so in your face and they're holding you back so clearly means that you now have no choice. You have to address these things, because if you don't, you're going to stay stuck in fatigue, for a very long time. So it's a kind of negative kind of motivation, but it is a kind of motivation. And I think a lot of the time, it's very nice to do things from a kind of happy, empowered perspective. I mean, that's what ideally we would want. But when we're dealing with these kind of really strong patterns of holding our own energy down, there's a lot of fear involved. And sometimes the only way to break that fear and to move past the fear is by having this alternative which creates even more fear. So it's like facing the blocks is scary and brings up all kinds of resistance, but not facing the blocks and being faced with being really tired all the time and feeling really stuck, that's even worse. So at some point that element of being tired and being ill starts to weigh more heavily than the fear of facing your inner blocks. And that's when you start to really face those blocks. And then when you go through them and you transform them, that's when you find your energy goes up a level again. So I just wanted to share that because as with anything, I think it helps, when you have a roadmap, and it's up to you to decide whether this applies to you, whether this resonates, whether it makes sense. But if it does make sense, if you feel like, oh, that makes a lot of sense for what I'm going through, then you also know what the path is, what the roadmap is to get out. And then you also know that every time that you're encountering this block, you're actually going to feel more tired, and it's going to feel like you're taking a step back because it's coming to the surface more clearly, And it's really, you know, a sign not to give up, but to keep on doing transformational work to get to the core of it, like what is really dragging you down. Because once you get through it, once you get through to the other side, you have more energy than you had before.